bad today.
Start off with a little recording. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Dan Maloney.
This is episode 280. TV tubes as amplifiers, smart tech in Sportsballs, and Adrian gives us the Fingie. This week in the news, we have tons of Hackaday news. We have a stockpile of Hackaday news. Start off, congratulations to the 2024 Business Card Challenge winners. That contest wrapped up 2 weeks ago. Our judges took a week to get it done, and we wrote about them early this week. This was like, what can you do in a business card form factor? And the answer is basically freaking anything. We got the wildest entries in this one.
Yeah, this one really pushed the limits. I really liked Andy Geppert's motor in a card. Thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's absolutely crazy. The Geiger counter, radiation detector was pretty sweet. The hand-soldered QR code one, which is like a lattice of little SMD LEDs, circuit sculpture style soldered to each other. That was insane.
Did we have a category for flattest card? Because, you can kind of stretch the business card thing. Like, the original Raspberry Pi was described as, credit card size computer. It's like, well, that's, maybe in X and Y it's a credit card, but not in Z.
Yeah, we had a thin one. And let's see, what was entered in there? Oh, yeah. Maave, Maave, made a door opening tool. And
oh, right, that one.
And there were the really sweet, like, veneer RFID tags.
Eric Steiger there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, those are pretty sweet. Great excuse to fire up the laser cutter. Yeah, the most amazing one I saw, I think, and maybe a little bit in your Raspberry Pi form factor problem, was what's it called? The Retro Medley card, which puts a retro video game playing computer into basically business card form factor. It has to have things like, USB ports to put joysticks into and like an HDMI port to plug into a TV. But it's actually like a mostly working retro gaming console, which is pretty rad. It's also got the hackiest solution I've ever seen for some of the connectors. It's got little fingers of extra PCBs that are kind of soldered onto the board, and two of them hold in an SD card, and two of them, it looks like it's for the audio jack. And that is just the sketchiest, jankiest solution I've ever seen, and I absolutely love it. I think this one at the drop dead date, when the judges were looking at it, it wasn't quite done, and I think it got a little bit, it was finished up a little bit past the deadline, but I think this one is an amazing project, and it's full of crazy little details, and you should check that one out too. I think we'll be seeing more from this one in the future because it just has too many crazy little hacks in it to be ignored. And in other contest news, we've started the Tiny Games contest, and that'll be running from this Tuesday until September 10th. And again, as usual, sponsored by DigiKey. So we have $350 gift certificates to give away. Basically, if you have a small game, a minimalist game in any of the various dimensions, you should enter it in this. And we're thinking, whether the display is small, we've done some one-dimensional LED strip games, maybe the game itself, the code's small, so like, Pong, Snake, Tetris, that style game. Sometimes the controls are really neat. So, if you have super minimal controls on your game that make it run, that would be really cool. Pocketable games are in play, and yeah, we've just seen so many awesome games over time in Hackaday, and in this kind of let's see how much fun we can get out of how little sort of vein. And so it'll be really fun to see what happens with this. Like the day before this went live, actually, we had a simple version of Pong played on a row of LEDs, and this is actually the one-dimensional Pong game done by, Amir Semik,
right?
But that's a sweet version of a game we've actually seen before, but he's got nice touch-sensing paddles on it, which make it different.
I recently saw a game of Snake set up on a network switch that was played with the LEDs over the ports.
Oh, sweet.
And it only had, it was only like 2 or 3 high. 2 or 3 pixels high, but you could chase this LED around the switch. I thought it was pretty cool. I don't know how you did it. I should probably look that one up. That sounds like a good one to write up, doesn't it?
And a super entry in the Tiny Games contest. Yeah, I can't wait to see what we get out of this. In kind of newsy news, Jenny List wrote up Time's Up for Mbed. It was ARM's answer to Arduino, basically. It was meant to be operating system and hardware abstraction layer all in one. It originally ran in the cloud, but there is actually a self-hosted and open source version of it. So although this is kind of ARM saying we're not going to support the cloud thing anymore, if you have projects that rely on the embed architecture, you can still compile them. It's not like the end of the world that way. Never had the same pickup in our community that Arduino did. I think one part of that was probably that it was more tightly controlled by its corporate overlords and didn't invite community involvement the way Arduino
That's never
did.
going to work for us.
I don't know. We asked in the comments if this was going to affect anyone, and a few people said, I tried to use Embed and I never really got into it. I know Al Williams, actually, one of our writers, was big on using it because it made some things really easy. That said, I don't think he's developed with it in ages either.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
And that brings us to What's That Sound? This is a reveal week. So we've got a sound that you guys listened to last week, guessed at, and now our own poor Dan Maloney is in the hot seat.
No, I've got to put my ear to it. All right, let's see what I can do.
You've got a chance.
Well, I mean, if we hadn't done the bloop already, I would say it's the bloop, because it's definitely under C, but it doesn't sound biological. So,
I told our listeners this, so it's only fair that I tell you. There are
just two different...
the recording is sped up in the second version to kind of make it more centrally placed in human hearing. The first one is actual speed. It goes actual speed, sped up, actual speed, sped up, so you can hear it twice.
Sonar ping of some sort. I don't know. It's not really. I know it's not, but...
I tell you what, a few people said the bloop, but that is not the right answer. The real answer is it's the sound of the first recorded ever gravity waves. It is them playing back as if it were audio, the LIGO data from the first ever gravity wave.
How cool is that? I had no idea it had a sound.
And so it's two black holes merging into each other and ceasing to exist and sending out a ripple that apparently... I don't know why it hits twice. I'm going to actually have to look into that because
wow,
I can't think of any reason why it would hit twice.
How far did that travel to get to us? I don't remember the numbers on that.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't know either. Let me see. I know this was the first observation, GW 150914, which is gravitational wave and the year. The chirp signal lasted over 0.2 seconds and increased in frequency and amplitude in about 8 cycles, from 35 hertz to 250 hertz. The sound is in the audible range and has been described as resembling the chirp of a bird. See, there you go.
The chirp, not the bloop.
Oh, here we go. The event happened at a luminosity distance of 440 megaparsecs, or 1.4 plus or minus 0.6 billion light years.
Whoa.
So kind of far, but that's, but not super far. So between kind of 1 and 2 billion light years away.
Wow.
LIGO detector where they recorded this is the most amazingly crazy scientific apparatus I've ever heard of. And if you want to watch a video of it, we actually had Dr. Keith Thorne from LIGO give us the keynote speech/video at Remoticon 2021. I'll throw the link in the show notes there if you want to see just what an insane engineering marvel this detector was. Basically, it's got, it shoots a laser at a mirror that comes back and intersects with another beam that's been split off of it. So it's a Michelson-Morley interferometer, and it detects shifts across this baseline of a few kilometers, shifts down to 1/10 of the diameter of a proton. It's like an incredibly sensitive instrument. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And Keith Thorne's talk is so good. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, I'll throw the link in the show notes. You absolutely, absolutely should. LIGO is phenomenal. And who knew that gravity waves sounded like blip? Oh, the second one could be the second site. They actually have two different observatories separated across the U.S. One's, I think, in Arizona and the other's over in like Tennessee or something, I think. I don't know. Don't hold me to this. But they're spatially separated from each other to cancel out all of the terrestrial noise, basically. So they correlate the two of them together. And if it's a hot day, the ground grows. If it's a cold day, the ground shrinks. If there's an earthquake, the ground wiggles. There's all of this other stuff that can cause, distortions along this path. And they kind of try to cancel those out by using two different sites. And actually, I think there's another one in Italy, but it was offline during the first detection, strangely enough. Yeah, bad luck, yo. Bad luck. So those two blips may actually be the one and then the other, as far as I know. I'm gonna have to look into this after the show. Anyway, long story short, 13 people entered, 10 people got it correct. 10 is awesome because it means a 10-sided die. So I'm gonna grab my wife's 10-sided die here, roll it, and we'll see who wins. The number is... Oh crap, I zero indexed it. Let's see, how am I gonna do this? The number is 7, which when zero indexed is number 6. Congratulations. Damn it. So congratulations to Lil Trash Panda. 2 black holes colliding. That's absolutely correct. Sorry for Groggy Beluga. It's 2 black holes merging. Fingers crossed, winning the shirt for my husband. Sorry. But good job. And Sam Factor with the most precise answer, who specified that it was GW159014, whatever. He got the actual event right. It's not hard. It was the first one, but there have been a number since then, so I guess it could have been others. Probably best nicknames include I really want that t-shirt, and I know where my towel is.
There's one fruit dude.
All right, well, enough fooling around. Let's talk some hacks. I'm going to start off with Mr. Solderfix's new video, 5 ways to repair broken PCB traces. And if you haven't watched this guy's videos before, as Ark mentioned in the comment line, this is just an excuse for bodge skill porn, and I'm here for it. And here, I am as well. I mean, because basically the solution to I have broken traces on my PCB is you scratch away some of the solder mask and you bridge the gap with something, right? He's got a number of nice solutions, and he does it about 1,000 times more neatly than I do. I promise you there will be a trick or two in here for you along the way, even though it seems like you should know everything. The one thing I really liked in his first repair, which was basically, if there's a super small cut in it, you can just kind of solder bridge it over. And he does it really nicely, again, by cleaning up the solder mask first. But then he throws some extra UV solder mask over the joint once he's tested it, and then cures it with one of those like UV flashlights that's meant for that UV epoxy stuff. And I thought that made a particularly nice looking and, probably waterproof, conformally coated, a really lasting and beautiful fix. That was pretty sweet. If you have like a long track that gets ripped up, you have to maybe go with a wire in there. He did a really nice bit with some blobbing solder onto a via to start it off. And he used some, quote, wire glue. I don't even know what that is, to fix the wire down on the board. And that looked really slick too. I mean, that's pro. If there's a big gap, he scrapes it and he adds wire. If it's a fat track, he adds in copper strip. It's just, if you have to work on a broken PCB, this is the way to do it right.
The featured image at the top with the carefully bent Kynar wire wrap wire, and it's mimicking the original trace, and beautiful sharp corners. The wire's nice and straight. Even the insulation color matches. It's just gorgeous. And the Kapton tape is just the pièce de résistance. It's just, gorgeous work. And kind of important too. I mean, you can make a bodge any way you want, but if you're trying to actually repair something and have the repair not come back to you as a problem, you better put some thought into the mechanical support of whatever you're fixing. It's so easy to get a trace to peel up.
I'm surprised we didn't get called out for the clickbait because that beautiful picture with the green matching wire and the Kapton tape, that Kapton tape is only on there until he gets the wire glue down and then he removes the Kapton tape. It's like even prettier once he's done with it. It's insane.
Nice.
Anyway, go watch the video, and if you're in the mood for bodge skill solder porn, you should check out the rest of his channel too.
I'll save this one for tonight.
Exactly. Too much information.
Too much. First up for me, build your own hydroelectric dam. Al Williams picked this one up. This is mini construction, and I'm going to say it's more like build your own beautiful model of a dam. It's not, to me anyways, to my way of thinking, it's not a real dam project. He's got a gully here that, a stream bed that's carved out with an excavator or something like that, and a small stream running through it. And then builds a concrete slab at the bottom of the bed of this valley here with penstocks going through it so that the stream can still flow through while he's doing construction on top of the slab. And then it's a brick wall, and he does some nice brickwork in there. And I was a bit confused at first, too, because this looks like it might be in China at a guess. So, construction materials are different. Construction methods are different. But, the craftsmanship is there, and at least as far as the brickwork goes and the parge coat that he puts on this thing. But, I mean, basically, he's making it look like a dam in miniature and does a nice job at it. It looks really good. The spillways alone are worth the price of admission. As far as the hydroelectric part goes, there's not a lot of head to work with. I mean, even, at the top of the spillway, I'm going to guess less than a meter, maybe a little bit more than a meter, somewhere in there of head to work with. The turbine itself goes down into a penstock that leads to the sub-basement, I guess, if you call it, of the dam. Water just falls through that. I can't remember what style of turbine that is. I've got a little bit of a micro hydro geek thing going on here. There's a stream on a piece of property that I've been eyeballing as a possible place to maybe do a hydroelectric plant, build a dam obviously, and do a hydroelectric plant. So watching him do this is kind of cool. The things kind of fall apart a little bit in terms of the wiring and stuff like that. That all looks pretty temporary. I think that sort of gives away the fact that this is not intended to be a serious effort at infrastructure for a farm or a ranch or something like that. I think it's more just to say, hey, I did a cool thing. And I don't have a problem with that. It doesn't look like it impounds a terribly large area so that when it fails, because it's not anchored into rock or anything at the sides, it's just just covered up with some dirt, so it will erode and the stream will get around it. But the impounded water will go downstream, and I assume that there's nothing downstream that's going to have a problem with that. It's not going to be much water. I just wouldn't want to be there when it happens. Or maybe I would, come to think of it. I don't know. That could be kind of fun. But anyways, it's a neat project showing off kind of a different skill set that we don't usually see. And again, more of a model than an actual serious attempt at generating electricity. But he does manage to generate some electricity, so good on him.
All right, well, my next hack is hacking an IP camera to run your own software by Alex Porto. So it's a 6-part blog post about work that he's doing on an IP webcam. So the IP webcam in question is a kind of no-name Chinese import. It's got a company logo on the front, but Alex can't find out to which company it belongs. So he's, as you should be, a little bit wary of the potential Trojan horse that a gift webcam offers you. So it's not without reason that Alex wants to flash this thing and make it connect up to servers that he controls. Like I said, this is step 6 along the way. It's really neat. This is the step where he has got the firmware downloaded and is figuring out how to decrypt it and then re-encrypt it so that he can send his own version of the firmware back up to the device. This is the part where I probably would have just thrown my hands up in the air. Like in, I guess this is part 2, he goes poking around in this thing and finds a serial port. And he's like, oh, that's a serial port. He gets a console on the thing. And fortunately, it's in single user mode. And that one user is root. So like for the cost of wiring 3 wires up to it, he's basically owned the thing. He got lucky. he comes up against this wall and he's like, I'm going to have to reverse engineer the encryption decryption software. And so he's got it, right? He's got root on this box. He can actually find a function called whatever, RSA underscore DEC. So RSA decryption. So he knows it's RSA. He has the decryption software and he runs it through Ghidra. He gets super lucky because there's a function name in there that when he types into Google, he finds the open source software project that this is actually based on. And that gets him an encryptor for it, which is fantastic. This encryptor decryptor suite has two modes of operation. One is where it does RSA on the whole file, but this is a really big file. I mean, it's 2 megabytes, which for a small embedded device is a lot to be doing an RSA decryption on. And it's got another mode called quick mode, where it encrypts a header, attaches that to it, and then in this header is a long key that then is just straight up XORed with the rest of the data package. And that is the winner, because if he can figure out what the random number generator seed is that generates this number that then encrypts the rest of it, he has the keys to the kingdom. And so he does the kind of minimum amount of reverse engineering, sets a breakpoint in it, runs the decryption software under a debugger, and pulls this random seed out of there. And then that lets him encode his firmware, cut and paste the header from the official firmware on top of it, and load it up to this thing. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is success. And when I was writing this up, I said, it was a kind of a combination of laziness and luck here. Like, on one side, the people doing the IP webcam software didn't really do a super good job with their security. I mean, yeah, what am I going to say? It wasn't impervious, but it wasn't super bad either. But they took the easy way out on this RSA encryption and didn't encrypt the whole thing. So it gave him a foothold there. And then he just got lucky because they left some strings in there that pointed to this open source software package that meant he didn't have to do any of the onerous reverse engineering himself, which saved him a lot of time.
The thing that got me about it was the social, it's not really social engineering aspect of it, but it is sort of, because people leave breadcrumbs in their code. They leave it in if you're sufficiently motivated, chances are good you're going to find something that leads you back to, in this case, the decryption encryption code. But or it's going to lead you somewhere that gets you to something else, that gets you to something else, and that's why we call them leads, I suppose. It's a detective story, and I really enjoyed reading it. It doesn't look like it's the end of it. I mean, this this is the IP camera, the cheap IP camera that keeps on giving. We keep getting stories out of it. So yeah, let's keep going, Alex, and see where we go.
I love the way you put it, that like kind of combination of work and research and work and research and work and research is something that everybody doing reverse engineering always brings up, because there's so much information out there already about a lot of devices. You would be foolish to just start trying to reverse it yourself when getting lucky with a function name means you can get the whole source code, nicely annotated, with comments and everything in there. It'll save you days/weeks of time. And so doing your research and kind of checking these little breadcrumb clues, like you said, is super, super important whenever you're doing anything new. In my misspent youth, we borrowed and snooped on some of those restaurant pagers with the intent of spoofing it and setting them all off at once. And we spent probably a good week between Q and I working on the protocol and figuring it all out. And we were like, yay, we were so happy when we got it figured out. And we presented it to some friends at the hackerspace, and Ash was like, oh, dude, that's just POXAG. That's the standard pager communications protocol. That's the what? And we opened the Wikipedia page, and there's the answer that we'd been working on for a week. Super.
But you educated yourself.
We had a good time. But if we were in a hurry, we would have wasted a week. And I think that's the point. And if it was something that was onerous and painful to do, like reverse engineering from the binary and RSA encryption decryption algorithm, like that's bad math on a good day. And then having to do it without the source code is even trickier. Like that's some intricate work. And so good job, Alex, for doing your research. I was going to say taking the easy way out, but it's actually doing it the reasonable way.
Okay, next up for me, you can use a CRT as an audio amplifier tube. News to me, but not apparently to Terminator. Basically what he does is take a 14-inch CRT color from an old color TV, a Panasonic TV, and uses it as an audio amplifier tube. Pretty much what it says on the tin. How he does it, though, it's pretty good. It is a mad scientist setup that includes things like a Leyden jar and a 555 timer used as the basis for a high voltage power supply. There's this little spinning motor on the neck of the tube that has magnets on it, and the intention of that is to keep the beams from burning in the phosphors in one spot. As a result, it makes these really, really cool patterns when you actually drive the tube with an audio signal. It's kind of like a little spacey 70s light show kind of thing, or 60s, I suppose. Actually getting to the heart of how this thing works is a little bit of a mystery. The audio is terrible. I mean, it's clearly working. Works better with different speakers than it does, or one speaker than it does with another, so it's highly dependent on the speaker. But he's got it rigged up so that he can't even touch the speaker while it's in operation because it's got high voltage on it. There's all kinds of little subtleties and tricks and tips if you're going to do this for whatever reason. You do want to be careful about the fact that you're slinging around high voltages and you're kind of defeating some of the safety mechanisms in the original TV. And plus you've got an electrically hot speaker sitting out on a plastic container. It's a little bit like Electro Boom meets Diodes Gone Wild. Check it out, watch the video, and see what he's doing. It's really cool.
Is it possible to turn anything with a vacuum and some metal parts in it into a vacuum tube? I think the answer might almost be yes. Like, we've seen something similar done with VFDs a lot. And actually, I think Korg, was it the new tube, put out a VFD that was especially designed to be an audio amplifier, vacuum tube, which is pretty funny. But this is Haggaday, right? And so going back into the way back history of Haggaday, we've seen people take, stock VFD displays from like a car radio or something and use that as an amplifying vacuum tube, because same thing. You've got a hot electrode, you've got a grid that blocks it. There you go.
There you go. Yeah, he's got a schematic here, and he shows the electron guns. He's got them basically hooked together in parallel. He sends 6.3 volts through those, so those just act as the filament. The cathodes are in front of those, and those are all connected to ground through a milliammeter. So you can monitor the current that this thing's putting out, or I guess sinking at that point. And then it's got 4 individual screens / grids between the cathodes and the anode. The anode obviously being the original anode that's built into the side of the tube that accelerates the electrons. So people can look at a tube schematic, a tube circuit schematic, and just say, okay, that boom, 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 boom. Yeah, me, not so much. So this is a little bit on the mystery side for me, but it's still pretty cool. And that light show is worth the price of entry anyways. Even though the audio is kind of bad, the light show combined with the audio is pretty cool.
All right, then my last hack this week comes from Adrian Perez. Flexures make robotic fingers simpler to print. This is a video demonstrating his really neat and kind of simple idea that he calls Fingie. It's a 3D printed finger, and the entire thing is 3D printed. And so it's got kind of spirally flexure springs for the joints between the different bones of the finger. I guess our fingers work this way too. There's a tendon that's in there that your muscle somewhere up in your forearm pulls, and that makes the bones bend over and lets you grab things. That he's also managed to do as a flexible, thin piece of plastic here. It's basically a print in place, flexible, thin plastic strip that he uses in place of the tendons. What this means is between the joints in the fingers and the tendons being all 3D printed in there, it's easy as heck to make. And, I think this is just version 1, and he'll sell you his designs. I think you can join his Patreon or something to get his designs. But I think it's almost enough for those versed in the fine arts of 3D printer design. You can have a look at this and be like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to steal that idea and use it in some other design that I need. Like, it doesn't have to be a finger. It can be an opening hatch. It can be, I don't know. There's all sorts of different ways to use this. And I'm just really impressed by both the print and placiness of this and the kind of extreme effort he makes to avoid having to go in there later with a piece of string and tie it to the end and route it through little gaps, because that's fiddly and extra work.
I love the simplicity of it. He does compare his design to Will Cogley's biomimetic hands, which there's a link for it in the article. They're masterpieces of engineering, but they do have hundreds of parts. Little bits of 3D printed parts, and then there's, screws and nuts to hold things together, and there's a whole bunch of servos that are, taking the place of muscles, like you mentioned, up in the forearm, Bowden tubes to move everything, springs and things, tons and tons of stuff. And, massive respect for Will for putting that together. But if you want to play with anthropomorphic hands, that might be a bit of a barrier to you. And the reason I like this one is because anybody could just print this thing up, or, like you mentioned, a similar mechanism for other applications, and start experimenting with hands. And I think that's where you see rapid development, when you get a bunch of brains on it that are all thinking kind of along the same lines. And I'm looking forward to seeing if this one does end up in a hand. Because the knuckles, the quote unquote knuckles, the springs that form the joints are a little on the bulky side. That could probably be streamlined somewhat. I don't know. Maybe you print, use a multi-filament printer and print TPU on the underside, so you have more of a grippy surface on the underside. One of the suggestions I had, although it would make it, a post-processing step, would be rather than use the printed band of material as a tendon, you could use strips of filament. It'd be more compact. You could route them together in a smaller bundle, the equivalent of a tendon sheath on the backside of the equivalent of phalanges for this design. That could be much more compact. I don't know, just thoughts. That's the mark of a great project, I think, is when you see something and you instantly say, oh, okay, I can do this with that. Move the state of the art along a little bit faster. So good job on Adrian for kicking it off.
Actually, I was looking through, and there is some prior work coming out of, I think, MIT or maybe Johns Hopkins or something. There's some serious robotics research labs who are looking into doing this, where this is making hands with flexures as the joints. But they've all taken the approach of, using normal standard cables or Kevlar string or whatever to actuate it. And I think that's the really cool bit here, is that he's got it all in one sweet 3D printable device. If you do some of your own 3D printed design and you haven't looked at or played around with flexures, you absolutely should. And I'll throw some really good links in the show notes for you, including Print Your Own Flexures, which is a resource from MIT, and then a bunch of great examples we've seen where, it's just hard to make something maneuverable in 6 degrees of freedom, and it's easy to do with flexures. And there are a lot of these things where if you can think up the constraints you need, there's already a flexure design out there for you, and you just need to kind of implement it in your project. And that's really cool. And we've seen them used on the big macro scale like this, where it's for like gripping things, but also for things as sensitive as micro positioners, for microscope stages and other things like that. It's really, really cool. And while flexures aren't specific to 3D printing, there have been some really cool high-tech things cut out of metal, for instance, to align the mirrors on the James Webb Telescope. It's also something that's uniquely well suited to 3D printing. And you can make things that would be kind of hard/impossible to do with traditional manufacturing easily like this with 3D printing. So go look at flexures if you want. Go look at Fingie for sure, and you will be inspired, like Dan said.
Last up for me is how the Bell system was built. This is a long and very good article by Brian Potter that describes mostly the kind of the business aspects of the development of the Bell system through the late 19th and good 3/4 of the 20th century before it just sort of became irrelevant, unfortunately. And I've written an article about that, what to do with the local loop and all that stuff. But that's as far as the technical part of this article goes, it does focus on the audacity, as Al says in writing up this article, the audacity of saying we're going to put a pair of copper wires to every home and business in the United States or in the world. The thing that you come away with when you read this article is that it's not something that could possibly have been engineered at the scale that it was finally deployed at. You couldn't possibly say, we're going to put a pair of copper wires to everybody's house and then turn it on. It's like, no, you didn't do that. The first thing you do is hook up some people, who are within a block or two of your quote unquote central office at the time, which was probably just the floor of an old, dry goods store or something like that. And everybody gets hooked up. You learn what works and what doesn't work with that. And then you go from there and you start expanding out. And the expansion is the kind of the thrust of the article. The fact that over a very short period of time, you go from, 0 telephones to 5 million telephones, and then you go to 50 million telephones and 500 million telephones. And the growth was exponential. At one point, AT&T was the second biggest company in the United States. Probably the most striking thing about this article is how much continuous improvement there really was. I mean, they never sat on their laurels, I guess, up until the end where they didn't really see cell phones coming, and then the whole thing just sort of fell apart. I don't know. I think the main graphic that really got me was the diagram of wire pairs, how they went from, 50 wire pairs in 1888, and they were 18 gauge wires, big thick wires, and they progressed all the way to 2121, so to 2,121 pairs in a single cable. And the cable diameter doesn't change that much. You get stuffing way more pairs in the same size cable. Amazing that you had technicians that could take a cable like that, dissect it out, find the right bundle, find the right pair in that bundle, and repair it, splice it, tap it, whatever, punching down all those connections into terminal blocks in the CO. A remarkable feat of engineering, but like I said, it couldn't happen all at once. It had to happen stepwise, and it never seemed to stop stepping up until, the 1990s or so, and things just sort of fell apart.
How was the Bell system built? By throwing an incredible amount of money at it over 100 years. That's how it was built. But it's really impressive to see, like you say, all the technological progress made along the way. And I haven't been sharing your kind of old copper wires nostalgia, but now I get a little bit of it. My first quick hack comes from Namoki Times. This is Seiko had a smartwatch in 1984. This is a profile of the UC 2000 smartwatch, and it really was a smartwatch. It had 2K of storage, and you could type notes into it. The coolest part was the complete wrist information system, whereby it plugged into a keyboard and coupled inductively with it, turning it into literally microcomputer of the appropriate power for 1984. Really, really fun. Vintage apparatus. A look at the DEC VT220, a proper serial terminal, is a nostalgic look back at the terminal that is kind of the prototype of terminals. I know if you run Linux, you very likely have a terminal that can run in VT220 mode. And he goes through a lot of the special features of the V220 in this one. And if you've never seen an old serial terminal in the flesh, he pokes and prods at it for you here. And bringing up the rear, Mad MCU playing rock, paper, scissors with a time of flight sensor. This is a really sweet hack. It does kind of extremely rudimentary, almost vision processing with an 8 by 8 distance sensor. And these are really cool. I'd seen them a few years back doing zones, but it was news to me that you could get so much resolution out of them. This is the VL53L5CX. But it basically sends out 64 different beams of, I guess, infrared light? I shouldn't speculate on that. Damn it. They bounce off. It sees how much time they took to travel back and forth and gives you 64 different distances. The hack here is using that as a rudimentary vision sensor, but you could imagine using it for all sorts of kind of gross object detection and distance measuring applications. I mean, that's what it's meant for.
Okay, my first quick pick is Tiny Transceiver Gets It Done with One Transistor. This is a project by Cyprian, who is Yankee Oscar 6 Delta X-Ray Echo on the ham bands. And this one transistor amateur radio transceiver, not just transmitter, transceiver, actually does have one transistor. Now, you do push it a little bit because he needs to feed the audio output to an amplifier, which has an LM386 chip in it, so there's a couple hundred transistors there. But we're going to ignore that part because you could certainly put this to some use with high impedance headphones, although Cyprian did jump into the comments and say that it was a little hard to do that. The build is gorgeous. It's built ugly style, ironically enough. In a tiny little wooden box, you could easily slip this thing into a pocket and it would pretty much disappear. Problem is, you've got to learn Morse because it only does CW. Next up for me, surgery, not just for humans anymore. There is a paper out that covers work by Eric T. Frank et al. That is observational work looking at ant populations who actually seem to not only rescue injured colony members from attacks or from damage that has occurred to them during termite mound attacks, but they also drag them back to the nest and perform basic surgery on them. The surgery is amputation. Again, that's probably one of our first surgeries too. Ants, however, use their mandibles to clip off damaged limbs and bring this colony member back, can actually sort of get back to useful work even though they've lost a limb. Amputation isn't their only solution. They can actually apply antibacterial compounds that are excreted in their saliva and maybe potentially even heal a wounded limb instead of just cutting it off. And finally, nitric acid is the hot new way to pick locks. It's kind of a stretch calling it picking a lock when you melt it with nitric acid that's injected into it, but if the goal is getting in as quietly and quickly as possible, nitric acid just might be the thing to use. This is covered in Germany's builds. It doesn't look like it is in any way limited to Germany. This could work pretty much anywhere. Although I guess in Germany there's a tendency to install locks with the pins down, so that would make it a little easier to dissolve the brass pins that are in there. The idea is basically you just throw the nitric acid and you inject it with a syringe or something like that and just wait for the pins to dissolve so that you can force the lock open. Just be careful when you're walking around with a syringe full of nitric acid. You might have a problem with that.
All right, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I wanted to feature Arya Voronova's Embedded Python. MicroPython is amazing. If you've been using MicroPython in your projects, I don't think you'll learn anything from this, but if you haven't, it will absolutely inspire you to give it a look. And I think that's what I really liked about this piece. Normally, when we write explainers, they end up being really kind of technical and, we're talking about what it can do for you. And what I really loved about this piece was that this is some software technology that's made Arya's life easier and better. And she's just stoked about it and is writing this to let you know why she's stoked about it. And I just love that spirit of sharing and, not so much, hey, look at what I've done, but hey, this is a really cool thing that some other people have done. It's really helped me. You should know about it too. And I guess that is kind of, what we do for a day job here at Hackaday anyway. But this piece really struck me as being kind of full love stacked behind it. That said, MicroPython is awesome, and I share Arya's feelings about this. I first started messing around with it for the badge we did using MicroPython last year, actually. I got to deep dive into it for the first time, and it makes doing simple things incredibly simple. Harder things get harder, of course, and it's got a bunch of gotchas. But at least on the plus side of the balance sheet, it runs basically like Python on your big computer. And this was the thing that struck me when MicroPython was new, was that it used a lot of resources. I mean, it used a then inconceivable 256K of flash, code space and 16K of RAM, right? And 10 years ago, that was harder to get on a microcontroller than it is now. Now that's, laughably normal. And the kind of size penalty of running an interpreted language like MicroPython is not such a big deal anymore. And all of the benefits are worth looking at. The big success of Python, like the big success of Arduino, is that there's a library for everything. And there is a library for everything in MicroPython. And that just makes getting up to speed super, super quick and easy. So pretty fun, pretty awesome. If you've got a moderately sized, normal sized these days microcontroller in your project, you could probably run MicroPython on it and boom, happy days.
This is the kind of article that I need because I haven't ventured into MicroPython at all, except for, I believe, didn't that alternate badge for the 2019 SuperCon, I think it was a badge that...
Yeah.
I don't know, I've got it over here someplace. Is it an Adafruit badge? I think it was. I think there was a MicroPython.
Careful, because there's a little bit of a weird turf war here between MicroPython and Adafruit's spin-off of its CircuitPython. And this Adafruit badge ran CircuitPython. And there are some kind of deep architectural differences between the two, but on the other hand, they're mostly broadly compatible. So don't get confused. I think Arya is going to come out with a CircuitPython article coming up soon. So if you haven't decided between which version you want, you will get the full details pretty soon.
Excellent.
But yeah, that badge was loads of fun.
I do like these, I'm not going to call them back to basics articles, but these deep dives into things that, some people probably already have, filed away and they got that in their head already, but not all of us have it. And having these kind of articles for reference or for inspiration, I really appreciate them.
Yeah, and I think Arya's whole point in writing this is something that has really made things a lot easier for her, and she's jazzed to share it with the rest of you. That spirit comes through loud and clear in this one.
Okay, my can't miss pick this week will come as no surprise to Elliot. Smart ball technology has reached football, but the Euros show us it's not necessarily for the better. And the reason I say that is because we talked about this in our pitch meeting the other day, and I maybe got a little passionate about this. Not about football/soccer. I'm an American. I don't get it. I don't get that sport. But I do appreciate what Lewin is talking about here in this article, which is basically that the balls are being instrumented with accelerometers and other sensors in a bid to make officiating easier. And I don't necessarily think that's what's happening here. I think it's definitely making officiating different. And Lewin and I are on the same page that I don't necessarily think that makes this game any better. Now, of course, like I said, I don't know the game, so I don't know. I can't comment on that. But I do know that all of these games, whether it's, my chosen one that I would prefer to watch is baseball, and I'm sure that baffles 90% of the people listening. Are like, why would you watch baseball? It's like watching paint dry. Exactly. That's exactly what I want when I'm watching baseball. I want to have it sort of, be a pastime. That's why we call it the national pastime. Basically what's happening here is you've got the ball is instrumented with accelerometers and basically being pinged at about 500 hertz by a microcontroller and sending back information on some sort of ultra wideband radio system. The balls need to be charged up. They're charged inductively, I guess, while you're waiting. The addition of these sensors apparently has been vetted so that, it's not affecting gameplay. It's not, it's not like loaded dice or anything like that in cards. Their IMU is centered it's held in with like this complex array of strings and cables and springs and stuff. So the ball plays like it should, and so there's no, you're not skewing the game because of the instrumentation. The video in the middle of the article here, or the referee on the field, who is doing an amazing amount of running himself. So I'm really impressed with the shape those guys are in. He saw something and then went over to a video replay to kind of jog back and forth between a couple frames to see if the ball was touched. He couldn't tell just by looking, but then he looked at the data from the ball that was synced up synced up with the video, and was able to see that there was a change in acceleration at the very instant that the ball appeared to touch the player's hands. So he called it as a penalty, and then that ended up with changing the course of the game. And I get that. That's absolutely fair. The rules are the rules, and using technology to dig into what's happening, something that happens so fast that it's hard to see, is an understandable approach to the problem. However, in my opinion, and this goes for soccer, it goes for baseball, it goes for football, hockey, everything else, the officials, to me, are the third team. There's always two teams, right? There's the defense, there's the offense, there's the visitors and the home, whatever. And they play each other. And they're the ones, that's the score. The score is going to be this to that at the end of the day. But there's a third team on the field, and that's the officials. And they're there to make sure everything is fair and make sure everybody follows the rules. However, why should they have the advantage that the players don't have? The players are not allowed to use performance-enhancing drugs. They're not allowed to have headphones in their helmets for American football to talk to the sidelines and get plays. Although that might have changed. They may actually have communications now. I'm not sure about that. Baseball, if you want to get information from the dugout to the pitching mound, you've got to use signals, hand signals. If the pitcher wants to communicate with the catcher, same thing, hand signals. My point is that the teams don't have any technological advantage. It's just human against human. Now, all of a sudden, you're putting this third team on the field that has the advantage of being able to see largely irrefutable data that shows them exactly what happened. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think the officials should have that edge. I think there should be a human factor, especially in something like baseball, where, and this again applies to all the other sports too. If you're going to be an official in a sport, you have to have a passion for that sport that probably exceeds the passion that the players have, because the players are getting paid a lot of money. But someone who's running up and down a field, they need to have a passion level that I think exceeds the players. And for them to be able to divorce themselves from that and judge the game fairly is a spectacle in and of itself, I think. I enjoy going to a baseball game and watching the officials do their job, because they need to know exactly where to be and where to look, because they need to know, what plays are likely for a given situation that they're in. They need to know where the ball is going to be, because their eyes need to be here, not over there. They can't watch the game. They can't enjoy the game. They can't see a lot of, of what we see. They have to watch the play that's going on at the time. And that's a human factor that I think they get it wrong sometimes. And I think it's okay to get it wrong, because the players get the plays wrong sometimes.
I hear what you're saying about some of the art of their job is being replaced with science.
Art.
Yeah. But I think it's also hard to say that it doesn't make the calls more accurate. And that's the part where you hit the tennis ball, it does or it doesn't go over that line, right? And I think at some deeper level, it should be called correctly. And I think every ref, every linesman, every umpire strives to call it as well as they can. And so I think it does make me wonder if they would also have some understanding for having a system where it can make the calling of it as accurate as it possibly can.
to me, the disparity between the unenhanced in any way players and the enhanced officials rubs me the wrong way for some reason.
Yeah, but their job is to be the all-seeing eye. We run into other technology, right? Like if the crowd sees it on the Jumbotron, right, in slow-mo, and it's obvious that the ref's call was wrong because the ref doesn't have the advantage of seeing it in slow-mo on the Jumbotron, you end up with like 40,000 angry people, and this poor ref down there going, yeah, well, you guys can see it on the big screen, but how was I supposed to know? You know? And so like if the ref is the third team, the fans are the fourth, and the fans definitely already have the augmented view. And they're bigger and they're rowdy and they've had a couple beers. That wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you'd like to follow the links, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, email us tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
Super much news. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Dan Maloney, who didn't clap either.
Oh, if that's the way you want to do it. Too bad I'm rambling and I'm not going to get to include that.
Okay, first up for me, build your own...
Let me see if I can find the brand name. What is the word I'm looking for?
Degrees of Freedom.
Degrees of Freedom.
Next up for me, how the build... Good Lord.
But, yeah.